Okay, let's dive into one of life's most profound questions, guided by a radical new theory.
So, what happens when we die? For centuries, we've had two conflicting answers to this ultimate mystery.
Is it just neurochemistry, or is it the soul's destiny? Science and theology have been at a total impasse.
But what if a new theory could unite them? And get this, it uses geometry.
First, there's vector reality. This is your mind as a compass, navigating the physical world.
Then you've got scalar reality. Think of your mind as a mirror, reflecting a sudden, intense feeling.
Think of it like this. Planning your day is a vector process. That jolt of grief, though, purely scalar.
Throughout our lives, our minds are constantly flickering between these two modes of being.
This brings us to the crucial point. What happens when the whole system is forced to shut down?
Well, the theory posits a dimensional collapse. The mind's structure implodes into a single, zero-dimensional point.
This isn't destruction. It's a hyper-compression of your entire existence into a timeless, infinitely intense moment.
And get this, science provides a clue. EEG data from dying patients shows something, well, extraordinary.
Instead of just feeding out, the brain lights up with activity linked to lucid awareness and memory.
So, could consciousness actually perceive reality after the body has failed? Let's check out the evidence.
This brings us to our star witness, veridical near-death experiences, or VNDEs.
To move beyond just anecdotes, scientists developed a scale to really test these claims with rigor.
Now check this out. We're talking an 82.3% agreement rate between human and AI raters. This suggests non-local perception is a real thing. And this leads to the theory's stunning conclusion.
So get this, heaven and hell aren't places. They're the inevitable geometric outcomes of just one factor.
Pride causes the soul to fight the collapse, generating immense friction where there's literally no escape.
Humility, on the other hand, allows for a peaceful surrender, opening the soul to a state of infinite love.
This theory transforms an ancient question into a profound personal one about the geometry of our own soul.
You know, we always think of science and faith as being on opposite teams, right? Especially when it comes to the big questions. But what if that's just a huge misunderstanding? Today, we're diving into a really radical theory that uses neuroscience and math to build an actual scientific model of the afterlife. And look, this isn't some airy-fairy philosophy we're talking about. This is a whole new geometry of existence. I mean, this is the question, isn't it? It's the one that has haunted us forever. For as long as we've been human, we've looked to either science or religion for the answer. And for, well, forever, it seems like those two answers have been locked in a death match in total opposition. So, you've got science in one corner saying, look, it's just biology. The brain runs out of oxygen, the electrical signals fizzle out, and consciousness gets snuffed out. And that's it, lights out. Then in the other corner, you have faith talking about a soul, an essence that goes on this journey to a world we can't see, a world beyond physics. Two totally different stories. Okay, but what if that whole fight is based on a false premise? What if there's a third option that actually brings them together? The theory we're digging into today suggests the afterlife isn't just a metaphor, and it's not a brain glitch. It's a real, actual event, and it's all governed by, of all things, geometry. Okay, so to even wrap our heads around how that's possible, we first need to get a handle on the theory's core idea, that our consciousness, right here, right now, is already operating with two completely distinct types of geometry. So here's the deal. The theory basically says our consciousness has two different operating systems. First, you've got what it calls the vector mind. This is our inner planner, our strategist. It thinks about distance, direction, cause and effect, past and future. Then you have the scalar mind. This one isn't about planning at all. It's about pure, raw intensity, that immediate feeling of joy or fear that exists only in the absolute present moment. Let's start with the vector mind. The easiest way to think about this is like an internal compass or a GPS. It's the part of your brain that makes a grocery list, plans the best route to work, or thinks, if I do X, then Y will happen. It's logical, sequential, and it operates in the 3D world of space and time. Now the scalar mind, that's totally different. Think of it like a mirror, just reflecting the raw feeling of a moment. When you get that sudden jolt of pure love for someone, or that gut feeling of dread, that feeling doesn't have coordinates, right? It's not over there, it just is. It's a zero-dimensional point of pure experience. That's your scalar mind at work. Okay, so we have these two modes of thinking, the planner and the feeler. What happens at the very end, when the power goes out and these two geometries collide? Well, the theory has a name for it, the dimensional collapse. And it all happens in a flash. Step 1, your body's energy supply just cuts out. Cardiac arrest, no more oxygen. Step 2, that super complex, energy-guzzling vector mind, our inner compass, it just can't hold its 3D shape anymore. The energy isn't there. And then, step 3, bam. Consciousness implodes on itself, collapsing from this sprawling 3D structure into a single, timeless, zero-dimensional scalar point. But wait, what about your whole life? All your memories? Do they just get deleted? No. The theory says the entire architecture of your conscious life gets compressed into a single point. It's like taking a massive hard drive and squishing it down into one super dense zip file. The info's all still there. It's just not spread out anymore. And this could be the geometric reason why so many people with near-death experiences report seeing their entire life flash before their eyes, all at once. And here's the crazy part. We can actually see the electrical ghost of this collapse happening in the brain. You think the brain's activity would just fade to black, but EEG data from dying patients shows the exact opposite. A huge, organized blast of high-frequency gamma waves, the very signature of high-level consciousness and memory recall. This isn't a brain quietly shutting down. It's like it's running its most important program ever, right at the very end. So, what about that famous tunnel of light we always hear about? The theory has this fascinating take. It says you aren't actually traveling through a tunnel. The tunnel is your brain's last-ditch effort to create a story it can understand out of a purely geometric event. Your entire visual and sensory world collapsing inwards to a single point. That terrifying inward rush gets translated by your mind's storyteller into a more familiar narrative, a high-speed journey forward. But this is where the theory gets really wild. If consciousness truly collapses to a non-spatial point, one that isn't located inside the skull anymore, then it should theoretically be able to perceive reality without the body's senses. It could see things without eyes and hear things without ears. And incredibly, scientists are actually putting this claim to the test. And the way they test this is intense. They use something called the veridical NDE scale. And believe me, the rules are tough. For a patient's claim to be taken seriously, saying they saw something while they were clinically dead, it has to be backed up by independent witnesses, it has to match the exact timeline of their cardiac arrest, and it has to survive every possible attempt to explain it away. The goal of the scientists is actually to try and prove it wrong. So after all that grilling, how do these stories hold up? Well, in a major validation study, they had human medical experts and even advanced AI systems blindly review these documented cases. The result? An 82.3% level of agreement that these cases showed strong evidence of non-local perception. That's not just a hunch, that is a stunning level of scientific agreement. Let that sink in for a second. What this means, and it's a huge deal, is that we now have real, scientifically validated, empirical evidence that consciousness can and does operate without the physical body. This single point is the foundation for everything else in this theory. Okay, so if consciousness survives this collapse and can exist without the body, that brings us to the final and maybe the biggest piece of this whole puzzle. If you enter a timeless, eternal, geometric state, what determines if that state is heaven or hell, bliss or pure torment? According to this theory, heaven and hell aren't places you go to. They're geometric states you become. A soul that's defined by pride, by ego, by the need for control. It fights the collapse, it resists. But you can't control a zero-dimensional reality. That resistance creates an infinite, agonizing friction. It's a self-inflicted hell. But a humble soul, one that's oriented towards surrender and openness, it just lets go. It allows the collapse to happen, resulting in a perfectly frictionless transition into a state of infinite peace. There's this amazing documented case of a Hungarian runner that just nails this idea. He was very intellectual, very proud, and his ego fought tooth and nail against dying. He tried to outthink it, to control it, and he described a state of absolute self-inflicted torture. It was only in that moment of total surrender, of just letting go, that the torture vanished and was replaced by peace. Okay, stay with me because we need one last piece to make this all click into place. It's a concept called qualitative infinity. Now, this isn't the infinity of numbers going on forever. Think of it like the color red. Redness itself has no size, it has no location. It's a pure quality. The theory takes this ancient theological idea and applies it to God, a being that is a pure, zero-dimensional infinity of existence itself. No parts, no location, just pure being. And this is the final synthesis. This is where it all comes together. When the human soul collapses into that zero-dimensional scalar point, it finally sheds what you could call the dimensional cage of our physical world. It becomes geometrically compatible with that zero-dimensional qualitative infinity of God. The humble, frictionless soul can merge with it seamlessly. But the prideful soul, with all its self-inflicted friction, remains a separate, isolated, burning point, forever separated by its own resistance. So it leaves us with this incredible and kind of terrifying final question. If your final destination isn't a place you go to, but a geometric state of being that's literally built from your deepest character, your deepest orientation, what is the geometry you are building right now with every single choice you make today?
So, have you ever wondered what actually happens to the architecture of your consciousness at the exact moment your biological body shuts down?
Right, and not just in a vague metaphorical sense, but, the actual mechanics of it.
Exactly. I mean, the literal structural mechanics of your mind facing its own end. So today, we're taking a deep dive into the research of Franklin Gall and a truly mind-bending framework called the dimensional collapse hypothesis.
It is such a fascinating topic.
It really is. And the goal of this deep dive isn't just to talk about near-death experiences. It's to look at a model that takes rigorous empirical neuroscience and, well, bridges it directly with metaphysical philosophy and eschatology.
Which is the study of ultimate reality.
Right.
And it is a massive undertaking, mostly because for decades, these two fields have been fundamentally at war with each other.
Oh, absolutely.
On one side, you have strict materialists who look at near-death experiences, or NDEs, and write them off as just like a dying brain glitching out, just a hallucination caused by oxygen deprivation.
Yeah, the reductionist view.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have these spiritual interpretations that are incredibly profound, but they often lack the mathematical or empirical frameworks needed to really hold water in a scientific debate.
They can feel a bit ungrounded.
Right. So what Langale's research does is completely abandon that tug of war. It demands rigorous empirical accountability, but it refuses to reduce human consciousness to a mere biological byproduct.
And to really grasp how the mind dismantles itself in death, we kind of have to start with how it builds reality during life.
Yes, the baseline.
The research leans heavily into topological neuroscience, which sounds incredibly dense, but it basically means studying the brain's activity in terms of geometric shapes and spatial relationships.
Right.
According to this model, your waking life right now is dominated by what's called real extended space, or vector reality.
Vector reality, exactly. Because you navigate a three-dimensional world. You use spatial extension, meaning distance, and you use chronological time.
So your brain is essentially functioning as a highly advanced compass.
That's a great way to put it. In the neurocognitive model, this is your global conscious orientation. It's the rational, planning, goal-oriented part of you.
Right, like when you map out your week.
Yeah, or calculate how much force you need to parallel park a car, or even just, reach out to grab a cup of coffee. Your mind is actively plotting vectors into the future. You are intrinsically tied to distance, direction, and time.
But the research points out that this isn't the only way you experience reality, which I found so interesting.
Oh, definitely not.
There is a contrasting geometric paradigm operating inside you right now called the scalar now. And mathematically, a scalar is entirely different from a vector.
It's a completely different beast.
Right. A scalar has absolutely no physical extension. It has zero volume. It has no direction at all. It is defined purely by magnitude and absolute intensity.
Which maps beautifully to what psychologists call our implicit, intuitive, affective processing.
Which is a total mouthful.
It is, yeah.
Yep.
But to put it simply, it is the raw, unadulterated experience of being. It exists entirely outside of physical geometry.
So think about it like this. Imagine you are walking through a crowded restaurant trying to find your friend's table.
Okay.
You are dodging chairs.
Yeah.
You're calculating the distance between waitstaff. That is a pure vector experience. You are processing 3D space.
You're using the compass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's say you sit down and your friend gives you some incredibly devastating news. Or, conversely, you look across the table and just feel this overwhelming wave of profound love for them.
Yeah.
That emotion is scalar. It is infinitely intense. But you cannot measure its geometry. You can't say, Like your grief is 3 meters to the left.
Or that your love weighs 4 kilograms because it operates outside the rules of physical extension. And what's really fascinating about the human experience is that our daily waking life is actually a continuous rapid oscillation between these two states.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so you sit at your laptop typing an email, that's vector planning, but then you get completely absorbed in the work, entering a deep flow state, or maybe you slip into a profound meditation.
You lose track of time.
Exactly. In those specific moments, your mind effectively collapses its awareness. It temporarily leaves the sprawling 3D map and compresses into the infinitesimal boundary of the present moment. You transition into a pure, zero-dimensional scalar state.
Which brings us to the core question of this entire deep dive.
Here we go.
If our conscious life is a constant back and forth between this multidimensional vector compass and this zero-dimensional scalar intensity, what happens when the biology that supports the vector side just fails?
When the battery dies.
Right, when cardiac arrest happens and hypoxia, oxygen starvation sets in, the brain loses the immense thermodynamic energy required to maintain its 3D architecture.
Because maintaining the illusion of space and time takes an incredible amount of biological fuel.
It's exhausting for the brain.
It really is. So when that fuel runs out, the research posits that consciousness doesn't simply vanish into the ether.
Okay, so what does it do?
Instead, it is forced to dimensionally collapse inward. It sheds its spatial dimensions, completely and permanently condenses into that zero-dimensional scalar point. The mind is forced entirely into the intuitive, affective system.
I really appreciate the digital analogy the source material uses to explain the mechanics of this, because it's hard to visualize.
It's a ZIP file analogy. Yeah, that's a good one.
Right. Imagine your computer's hard drive. You have thousands of sprawling, interconnected folders. Your childhood memories, spatial maps of your hometown, career knowledge.
Spatially, on a physical drive, they're separate.
Exactly. But when the system detects a catastrophic power failure, it executes an emergency compression algorithm. It takes terabytes of 3D architecture and forces it into a single, incredibly dense ZIP file.
It doesn't delete the information.
No, it just removes the distance between the information. Time, which is really just a dimension of distance between events, completely ceases to exist. Everything occupies the exact same geometric coordinate.
And that is why NDE survivors consistently report the famous life review, where they see their entire existence happen all at once.
Because when the spatial dimension collapses, sequence collapses right along with it.
Precisely.
But hold on, because I have to challenge this premise for a second.
Go for it.
If the mind is collapsing into a completely non-spatial zero-dimensional point, why do almost all NDE survivors report traveling through a tunnel?
Oh, right.
Because a visual tunnel with a light at the end is highly spatial. It's the definition of 3D geometry. If the spatial architecture is gone, a tunnel makes no logical sense.
It's a brilliant contradiction, and the research actually resolves it by leaning into evolutionary psychiatry.
Okay, how so?
Well, throughout the animal kingdom, when a creature is faced with an inescapable lethal threat, like being caught in the jaws of a predator, it triggers an ancient biological reflex called thanatosis.
Playing dead.
Basically, yeah, death feigning.
Yeah.
The external motor functions completely paralyzed, but internal conscious awareness actually spikes to process the inevitable end.
So they're hyper-aware.
Very much so. And when a human faces biological death, this exact same ancient reflex engages. But humans have a massive developmental layer that other animals just don't have.
Our abstract cognition.
Exactly, and our relentless symbolic narrative engine. The human intellect simply cannot process a pure, abstract, geometric implosion. It literally doesn't have the vocabulary for zero-dimensionality.
Oh, wow. So it has to translate it.
Yes. The brain's narrative engine translates this high-speed dimensional collapse into a coherent spatial story. As the visual and cognitive fields rapidly collapse from the periphery into a central point, your brain narrativizes that inward rushing sensation as a high-speed journey down an enclosing tunnel.
So the tunnel isn't a physical place you're traveling through.
Not at all. It is your mind desperately trying to draw a picture of its own geometric condensation.
That is wild. And the neurobiological evidence backing this up is staggering. Because when we look at the clinical EEG data of dying patients, the brain doesn't just quietly fade to black.
No, it does the exact opposite.
Precisely at the onset of clinical death, there's a massive, highly organized electrical storm. We are talking about a paradoxical surge in gamma band activity, localized heavily in the temporoparieto-occipital zone. the TPO zone.
Which is crucial because the TPO zone is basically the grand central station of the brain. It's the junction where your vision, your hearing, and your somatic sense of your physical body are all stitched together to create your conscious reality.
Exactly. And this gamma surge isn't just random noise. It is actively modulated by lower frequency alpha and theta rhythms.
Cross-frequency coupling.
Yes. And in a healthy waking subject, that specific pattern is the exact neurobiological footprint of hyperlucid memory retrieval.
So finding that specific, highly organized electrical pattern in a dying, oxygen-deprived brain is the physical footprint of topological condensation.
It's the brain expending its very last reserves of energy to compress a lifetime of extended 3D experiences into that singular scalar ZIP file.
It's the biological hardware facilitating the geometric transition. But we have to be careful here.
Why is that?
Well, observing an electrical storm inside a dying brain only proves the biological mechanism of the collapse. If we want to prove that this dimensional collapse actually transitions the mind into a non-local state, meaning consciousness survives completely outside of physical geometry.
We need more evidence.
Exactly. We need evidence that is far more rigorous. We need proof that consciousness can perceive reality entirely outside the physical body.
Which brings us to the empirical battleground. Veridical near-death experiences, or VNDE.
The ultimate test.
Right. For decades, skeptics have dismissed people claiming they floated above their bodies as just, having lucky guesses. Or maybe their brains subconsciously picked up auditory leakage from the surgical team while they were under anesthesia.
Sure, it's easy to write off.
But to combat this, the research utilizes the Veridical NDE scale, which is a brutally strict framework built by a consensus of medical experts.
Veridical perception refers to instances where clinically flatlined patients return to life and report objective, highly specific physical events that they could not possibly have perceived with their physical eyes or ears from their vantage point on the operating table.
And the scale they use to validate this isn't subjective at all. It features 8 highly restrictive falsification criteria.
Right, they check timestamps, things like that.
Yes, it checks the timestamps on the medical monitors to ensure the brain was completely flatlined during the exact window of the reported perception. It demands third-party corroboration from objective, sometimes even hostile witnesses like skeptical surgical staff.
And crucially, it allows for 0 erroneous perception.
None. If a patient perfectly describes a conversation happening in the waiting room, but gets the color of the surgeon's shoes wrong, the entire case is thrown out. It is an impossible threshold.
It is designed specifically to eliminate confirmation bias.
And the way they tested this recently is just fascinating. They took 17 highly documented cases of potentially veridical NDEs. First, they were evaluated blindly by 11 independent human medical experts.
Okay.
But the researchers knew human experts still have biases. Some want to believe in the afterlife, some want to aggressively debunk it.
Naturally.
So to completely remove human bias, they ran these 17 cases through 3 distinct artificial intelligence raters powered by advanced large language models.
Which is a brilliant methodology. How exactly did the AI evaluate them?
They fed the raw, unedited medical logs and the patient transcripts into the LLMs with highly specific strictures. The AI was not told these were near-death experiences.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, it was simply instructed to cross-reference the patient's claims against the objective surgical notes and flag any logical inconsistencies, spatial impossibilities, or visual discrepancies based on the physical layout of the room.
Because the AI has no religious beliefs, no fear of death, no dog in the fight.
Exactly. And the result? The AI and the human experts reached an 82.3% high-level agreement validating the non-local perceptions.
Wow.
14 out of those 17 cases passed the 8-point falsification criteria flawlessly.
The implications of that are staggering. I mean, it suggests that the dimensional collapse doesn't just compress the mind into nothingness, it successfully transitions the mind into a zero-dimensional scalar state that is genuinely non-local.
It's functioning outside the body.
Right. From this unextended vantage point, the consciousness retains the capacity to perceive the extended 3D universe. It completely shatters the classical models of modern physics and neurology.
So we have the biological mechanism, the ZIP file compression. We have the empirical proof, the AI-validated non-local perception.
Right.
But this leads to the most profound question of the deep dive. Once your consciousness successfully sheds its spatial geometry and condenses into a timeless zero-dimensional point, what actually determines what that eternal experience feels like?
And this is where the research seamlessly transitions from topological neuroscience right into the ontology of eschatology.
The philosophy of the end.
Exactly. What Lengelel's synthesis argues is that heaven and hell are not physical places. There are no fiery subterranean caverns, and there are no harps on clouds.
That's all just imagery.
Yeah, those concepts are just metaphorical pedagogies. They are visual shorthand invented by early theologians to help human minds grasp the unimaginable weight of these states.
Okay, so what are they really?
In ontological reality, heaven and hell are inescapable geometric states, and they are determined entirely by one thing: the individual's moral orientation at the exact moment of collapse.
Specifically, how their free will aligns with either pride or humility.
Exactly. Let's look at the geometry of damnation first. In profound theological frameworks, hell isn't a torture chamber run by a warden. Satan is defined as a purely spiritual, scalar entity characterized by absolute, unyielding pride.
Okay, I thought.
When a human undergoes dimensional collapse, the physical arena vanishes. But if their ego, their vector compass, is deeply entrenched in pride, it will violently resist this geometric condensation.
Because a prideful soul has spent its entire life dominating its environment, right? Manipulating space, controlling time.
Yes. So when space and time are stripped away, it desperately attempts to exert directional agency in a zero-dimensional reality where movement literally no longer exists.
I want to frame this with an analogy because the concept of non-spatial torment is hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Imagine sitting down to play a game of chess. You are an absolute master. You demand to move your knight, capture a pawn, and control the board. But suddenly, the physical chessboard, the pieces, and the very concept of space cease to exist.
The game is gone.
But because of your unyielding pride, you refuse to stop playing. You keep fiercely trying to assert spatial rules in a reality that has no space. That impossibility creates friction.
And that cognitive friction is the essence of hell. The research highlights a truly harrowing case study documented by Robert Prosnek that brings this into sharp focus.
Oh, the Hungarian marathon runner.
Yes, it involves a runner who collapsed from severe overexertion and fell into a lethal diabetic coma.
This case blew my mind. Because this runner wasn't an evil person by any conventional metric. He was highly rational, deeply self-reliant, like a type A personality who had spent his life asserting total physical control over his body through extreme athleticism.
He was a master of the vector world.
Right. So when his brain underwent dimensional collapse, his intellect couldn't accept the loss of control. Driven entirely by his deep-seated intellectual pride, his ego mounted a ferocious resistance. He actually tried to logically hack his way out of death.
Wow.
He demanded his physical autonomy back.
He was trying to apply 3D vector logic to a zero-dimensional inevitability, and because of that, his arguments structurally failed.
And this failure trapped him in a recursive loop of torment. Every time he tried to logically argue his way out of the void, the cognitive friction amplified. He was literally crushing himself.
That is horrifying.
And the most terrifying part of his account. In the midst of this unimaginable mental agony, he realized that an infinite force, which he intuitively recognized as God, was observing him.
But God wasn't inflicting the pain.
No, the infinite force was observing with profound, quiet compassion. God wouldn't intervene because to force the runner to surrender would be a violation of the runner's free will.
The torment was entirely self-inflicted. He had constructed a demonic prison out of his own ego. It was a hall of mirrors built by his unyielding pride, violently rejecting the absolute geometric necessity of the scalar collapse. The friction was the fire.
So if that is the geometry of damnation, what is the alternative? What does the geometry of salvation look like?
Heaven, within this topological framework, is achieved through the fundamental moral orientation of humility.
Humility.
Right. If an individual reaches the precipice of dimensional collapse and possesses the humility to release their desperate grip on egoic control, if they let go of the illusion of space and time, they cease to resist the compression.
They just let it happen.
Exactly. The transition becomes a perfectly frictionless surrender. The consciousness peacefully aligns its directional compass with the absolute reality of the scalar state.
Stripped of the ego's rigid boundaries.
Yes, the unextended mind opens outward, becoming a perfectly receptive vessel.
And it's crucial to note that the Hungarian runner was ultimately saved by the exact mechanism.
He was.
In his account, Just as he felt his mind was about to be utterly annihilated by the friction of his own resistance, he experienced the sudden, unexplainable moment of profound grace. His ego finally broke. He surrendered.
And what happened?
The moment he stopped fighting, the agony vanished, and he eventually returned to his body. He woke from the coma permanently changed, realizing that true faith is not an intellectual exercise you can master. It is a necessary, humble surrender.
That frictionless surrender is what transforms the zero-dimensional point from an isolated prison into an illuminated gateway.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this deep dive.
Yes.
If the human mind compresses into a tiny zero-dimensional point, how does it actually interface with an infinite God?
That's the big question.
Because when we think of God, we usually think of something massive, right? Like an
Okay.
endless space or an infinite timeline.
And that is the trap of quantitative infinity.
Unpack that for us.
In mathematics and cosmology, infinity is usually quantitative. It's a physical volume that never ends. But if we look at Orthodox theology, specifically Thomistic theology, it strictly rejects the idea that God is a quantitatively infinite space.
Why?
Because if you define God as an infinitely large space, you are still subjecting the creator to the limitations of physical extension. A massive space still has parts. It can be divided.
Right. If God takes up space, then God is just a really, really big object.
Precisely. Instead, Thomistic theology defines God by qualitative infinity. God possesses absolutely no physical parts, no spatial extensions, no chronological sequence. The theological term is ipsum esse subsistens.
Okay, let's translate that for the listener. What does ipsum esse subsistens actually mean in plain English?
It translates roughly to the pure subsistent act of to be. God is not a being in reality. God is the sheer, unadulterated act of existence itself.
Wow.
God's infinity is a metric of absolute, boundless perfection, not physical size. God exists in an actual infinity, a timeless, eternal present with zero spatial geometry.
And this is where Langale's dimensional collapse theory clicks into place with such incredible elegance.
It fits perfectly.
Because the extended 3D universe is the domain of biology. At death, that quantitative web completely collapses. Your mind compresses into a zero-dimensional scalar point. You entirely escape the cage of quantitative physical infinity.
Leaving only the core.
Right. What remains of you is pure, unextended ontology, pure existence. And because God's qualitative infinity also entirely lacks spatial extension, your humble scalar consciousness is the exact geometrical puzzle piece required to interface seamlessly with the divine. The humble soul slips perfectly into ipsum esse subsistence.
You share directly in God's nature. You exist in a pure, frictionless state of boundless existence and love, completely unhindered by physical barriers.
While the prideful soul experiences the exact opposite.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the prideful soul, desperately trying to assert spatial control where there is no space, walls itself off, becoming an isolated, burning point of friction.
It's a completely unified metaphysics of the afterlife. Heaven and hell are revealed not as primitive myths or fairy tales, but as absolute, inescapable geometric and ontological destinations.
It fundamentally reframes everything we think about the end.
It really does. Once you truly understand that biological death is just dismantling of your spatial vectors, leaving behind only the raw, fundamental truth of your moral orientation, it completely changes how you view your daily life.
Every choice matters.
It makes you realize that every single day is a preparation for that collapse.
So, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. Throughout your day, you will inevitably face small frustrations. Someone cuts you off in traffic, a project fails, you lose an argument. In those small moments where you feel a sudden burning need to violently assert your ego, to force your logic on others, and to demand total control over your environment, are you just rehearsing the cognitive friction of your own future prison? Or, in those exact same frustrating moments, can you practice the frictionless surrender required to eventually meet the infinite?